Hi everybody, today I'm going to be doing a review of the Buck Marksman. They don't look quite like this standard. I've scuffed mine up partly for visual reasons but also partly for reasons that we'll talk about later. This is a very interesting knife. It's a collaboration with G&G Hawk, who have designed some very unusual stuff in the past, and this knife isn't really any different. A lot of this knife is, however, pretty normal, but the lock is very unusual, especially since it's made by Buck. Buck are normally quite a traditional company. They make a lot of lockbacks and similar stuff, so it was a bit of a surprise when this one got released. Here it is against an Open Heel number 8, an Ontario Rat Model 1, and a Kershaw bare knuckle. So you can see it's in the same standard size as the last two knives that I've reviewed, which is 3.5 inch blade. This one, the Buck Marksman itself, is 8.25 inches overall and weighs 4.3 ounces, which is pretty light for a knife of this size. The Marksman is an odd knife. Some of this knife is very interesting and some is pretty normal, so I'm going to try and get through the normal stuff as quickly as I can so that we can focus on what's interesting here. First up, let's talk about the lock, which is really kind of the most interesting thing here. The knife is held open and closed by this strap, which is attached to the spine of the knife and flexes to catch the tang of the blade. It works similarly in the closed position, with the force from the strap providing the detent. The lock doesn't make contact with the blade when it's not open or closed. So in the middle of the opening arc, there's nothing touching the blade. The blade is in fact completely free floating in the middle. And then at each end of the arc, the blade will drop into position with a bit of resistance. So to show that off, let me get a frame lock out here. Both of these knives partially open but not locked open yet. If I move a frame lock knife, you can see it doesn't push back. At the moment it's just staying where it is, and then it's very keen to lock open. With the Marksman, when I push the blade, you can see it does spring back towards my finger, and you can see the strap flexing. The strap has to flex up for this knife to lock into position. And once the strap's flexed up enough, the knife locks open like that, but it means there's a continuous pressure back from the strap. And what that means is, if you're trying to open this knife and you don't flip it properly, what happens is what you saw there. It partially lifts up the strap, and then the pressure from the strap fires the blade back towards your fingers, which is not great, especially when this knife came and the lock was really stiff, and it would do that quite a lot. Now that it's broken in, if I'm actually trying to flip it, it flips pretty easily, but it is something you should be aware of. The lock can also be adjusted with a 1mm hex screw down inside this little hole in the back, which is nice, but what isn't nice is that the lock needs to be adjusted. When this knife runs perfectly, it's great, but it doesn't really stay running perfectly for very long. And that's something which really isn't great about this knife. Once it's adjusted, it stays adjusted for a while, but sometimes I just pick it up and there's enough blade play for it to rattle. Sometimes it doesn't lock up. It's always fixable, but it's not great that you have to fix it sometimes. Something like a frame lock doesn't really require the same amount of adjustment. This knife locked open when I got it, and it still locks open now, and there's never been an issue with that. Whereas on the Marksman, you do kind of need to be aware that you may need to adjust the lock quite often. The lock is, at least in theory, very strong, and the jimping down the side here makes it very easy to use with gloves on as well. It's a very fidgety knife. It has a flipper tab, as you've seen me opening it before. It also has a thumb hole. You can open it with the thumb like that. It can also be middle flicked quite easily. And the lock itself, if you take the pressure off the lock and a little bit of wrist, you can get the knife to deploy like that as well. Yeah, you see it. The action isn't the most consistent all the time. It can be a bit the same when closing in terms of difficult, I guess. When I first got this knife and the strap was tighter, I had to close it this way. I had to grip on both sides of the lock bar put the back of the knife into the palm of my hand and push on the blade, and it used to take a lot of force to get the blade to come loose, at which point the knife would kind of fire closed like that. Now that it's broken in, it is way better. As you can see, I can do it with my thumb now. Oh. As you can see, I can release the lock with my thumb quite easily now. So it's far better than it used to be. The scales are aluminium, and the blade is made of 154 cm, which is a fine steel for this price, but it's also Boss heat treated 154 cm. Don't know if you can see the Boss logo on the back there, a little bit. And that definitely takes the steel up a notch, so the steel's really pretty good. The blade shape is, well, you can see the blade shape, it's pretty standard, it's pretty normal blade shape. The grind's pretty good though. It is hologrammed. That means that if you were to look at this knife end on, you will not see it on camera, but actually you can almost see it on camera. You can see that this looks flat section of the blade is actually slightly curved like that, and it leads to a thinner cutting edge ordinarily. So that's very good. That, with the spine of the knife not being overly thick, means this knife actually cuts really pretty well. It slices well, it slices better than I expected it to. The tip is pretty strong, but it's not too imprecise, it's quite a good tip. The choil isn't quite perfect. You see the change, you see the grind here? Yeah, the sharpened blade line's coming back past it a bit. So the sharpening choil isn't quite perfect, but that's not the worst thing in the world. When I first got this knife, it didn't have a pocket clip. I didn't order a version of the Marksman that doesn't have a pocket clip because there isn't one. So Buck let one of these get out the factory without a clip, which really isn't very good. Fortunately, the company I bought it from, which is handtools.com again, they took care of it for me. They got in touch with Buck. They had to get in touch with Buck multiple times, which isn't good. But eventually Buck sent me out a clip. I'm glad Hand Tools took care of that for me. That was great. But Buck really need to be quicker to fix mistakes, especially when it's a mistake like that. When something makes it out the factory missing a part. The clip and the two back screws here in the back were both missing. It's pretty poor. And it definitely raises some quality control concerns that they let something out missing a part. But a lot of people have had positive experiences with Buck warranty, so maybe that was just me. Maybe I was just unlucky. Watch other people's reviews and see what they say. The hardware on this knife is not good. Really not good at all, in my opinion. It's a 3mm hex on either side of the pivot. That's okay, I can live with that. These screws here are 1.5mm hex, which is really small. And you look at the head size of the screw, they really didn't need to be that small. Down here we've got T6 and then T6 for the clip as well. And like I said, 1.5mm hex down inside that hole to adjust the lock. These T6 screws here are going into a really big piece of metal in the back. It's quite a sizable chunk of backspacer in here. And as you can see, there's already more screw head than there is room taken up by the T6. They look small, even on those screws. These could easily have been T8, and in fact the whole screws could have been bigger because they're going into a big chunk of metal underneath here, so there wouldn't be any problem using bigger screws there. Here, you can see, once again, there's plenty room. Put bigger headed screws in there that aren't 1.5mm hex. These are bad screws. They're not good quality screws and they're too small and they stripped very easily. And it's important to be able to take apart and maintain, in my opinion, any knife, but especially a knife that's on bearings, because bearings get dirt in them and hair in them and all sorts, and then they don't run smoothly. You need to take the knife apart and clean out the bearings. But taking this knife apart is very difficult, especially once these screws start to strip, which they will because they're very poor screws. Anyway, once the pocket clip arrived, it was actually quite good. It carries deeply. I like the way it's done, attaching to the flat end of the knife. It means it's reversible without having holes for a clip on the other side. This clip's reversible using the same holes, and it carries completely deeply, so that's very good. It does, however, carry very straight. If you look at the line of the pocket clip here, and the line, for example, from Kershaw bare knuckle, you can see that the bare knuckle's hiding in the back of the pocket. The Marksman's carrying very straight. And when you couple that with the really aggressive jimping on the side of this lock strap, that's not very good, because it means your hands, or whatever else is in your pocket, anything in your pocket is going to be gnawed away at by this, and by the flipper tab, which was also quite sharp. I took some of the edges off there as well. Yeah, it's not great. Not great in the pocket. I wouldn't suggest that you carry anything you care about in the same pocket as this knife. The sharp edges on the jimping are one of the worst things about this knife, maybe even the worst. I used the diamond stone to kind of chamfer them. I did the same, like I said, to the flipper tab, and the same to the little hole cut out here for the flipper tab, that back edge. Because initially when I got the knife, I would flip it and my finger would land there, and that edge was quite sharp and it would catch my finger. So that's something I felt I had to do, which really isn't very good. The whole knife I think could have, benefited from a stone wash to take the worst edges off. The grip's fine. The spine of the knife is a bit smooth for my taste. Having this really aggressive jimping here and then none where your thumb lands when you're using the knife isn't something that I love, but it's okay. There's a decent blade guard here, and the swell towards the back means that your hands, you get a secure grip on it, but I would have liked some jimping on the top. This knife is made in the USA and it costs $115, which I think is a pretty fair price for the knife, but I kind of wish it had cost a little bit more. If they charged, say, $150 for this knife, but they fixed the screws, they did something about the lock loosening and adjusting itself, they made the lock stay in place a little bit better, and they fixed the flipping screws. I know I said that already, but seriously, fix the screws and fix the overly sharp lock bar. For $115, if they had to fix those three big issues, this would have been a really good knife. And I think it would have been better value with those issues fixed at $150 than it is with those issues at $115. So if I wanted a ball bearing USA made flipper with a deep carry, reversible pocket clip and aluminium scales, I'd have the Kershaw bare knuckle. It's quite a chunk cheaper. It's about $40 or so cheaper for the standard version, and for the same money as the Marksman you can get the 20CV version. They're dealer exclusives. I think they're only available at Knife Centre and Smoky Mountain Knife Works, but for the same money as the Marksman, getting a bare knuckle and 20CV in my opinion is a far superior knife. Definitely carries better. I prefer it ergonomically. I would definitely take the bare knuckle before I would take the Marksman. All that being said, the Marksman definitely isn't a bad knife. It's only really those few issues that stop it being great, but it's unusual enough that I'll definitely be keeping mine around. I love that Buck went a bit outside their comfort zone and made it, and I really hope that they do some more unusual stuff like this in the future. So that's it for the Marksman. My next review will be of this CJRB Rampart, most likely. I will probably also try and do a review of my SOG Sync quite soon, and I have my first Hinderer ordered. So yeah, it's my first proper Hinderer. This is a Hinderer design, I have another Hinderer design, but my first Hinderer branded knife is ordered. It's delayed drastically because of coronavirus, but once it gets here, I'll be doing an unboxing video of that, and I have some parts coming for that as well, so there'll be plenty of video content about that coming. Thanks for watching, bye.